I'm Dr. David Badov. Welcome to HealthScreenTV. We have a very interesting podcast today. We're going to talk about microbiome, what is microbiome, and why it's increasingly becoming a very hot topic in health and longevity. We have an expert in microbiome science, who is recognized as one of the leaders in the field. Professor Chong also, in addition to all his qualifications, has a PhD in microbial ecology. Professor Chong joins us from Monash University, Malaysia campus. Professor Chong, thank you for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me to share my work in microbiome science.
I'm really keen to get into this. So let's start with the basics. What is microbiome and why is it becoming incredibly important to our health and longevity?
Thank you. So we are in fact more microbe than human. We have about 39 trillion microbial cell, and we have about 30 trillion human cells. So that makes us a little bit more microbes than human. The large number of microbes is playing very important role in our body system. So they basically can be found in various part of the of us. So you can actually detect the microbes in the gut, in the skin, in the oral cavity, in the reproductive traits. So they are the first contact point of our food. So they helps in digestion. They also helps in the processing of the medication that we take, and also they also helps in the immune regulations.
So, Professor Chun, as I understand, microbiome affects not only digestion, but also metabolism, even mental health. Can you please explain to us how does this work and why does this happen?
Thank you, David. Indeed, you are correct. So, for the immune system regulations, the microbes are able to control the production of cytokine. The cytokine will actually cause the inflammation. By reducing the production of cytokine, that actually keeps the inflammation low in the gut. So, other than that, the microbes also helps in controlling the mucosa barrier integrity. So, this is through the production of mucus. Um, the other functions of microbes is actually to train the innate and adaptive immunity. So basically, the microbes are able to help the immune cell to recognize between the pathogen and also the harmless antigens. For the metabolic control, certain microbes are very efficient in harvesting energy, for example, the firmicutes. So we talks about the FB ratio when you have a high firmicutes versus a low bacteroidetes ratio. This is actually a sort of like a signature of people who are prone to obesity. Microbes also control the metabolism of bile acids. Certain microbes are able to deconjugate the bile acid in helping or in assisting the excretion of the lipids. The Microbes also produce short-chain fatty acids. Bacteria such as Faecalibacterium pranisii are able to produce short-chain fatty acids through the fermentation of fiber. So these actually regulate appetites, glucose metabolism, and also the fat storage. Finally, one of the hottest topics is basically on the gut-brain axis, or the on how microbes assist in mental health. So the microbes produce neurotransmitters such as serotonin, GABA, and dopamine. So known microbes such as lactobacillus and bifidobacteria are very much related to anxiety behavior through the vagus nerve signaling. So finally, the microbes are also the dysbiosis in microbe also increase gut permeability. So that allows the bacterial lipopolysaccharides to enter circulation. So that causes systemic inflammation, again affecting the brain and also driving the depressions.
It's very interesting. I did see some studies which, particularly looking at depression and anxiety, which altered the microbiome, leading to some improvements. So I think this is really a very, very interesting area of research. Professor Chong, we all have different microbiomes. So what factors shape an individual's microbiome during lifetime?
Right. So it is affected by various factors. For example, the birth mode. So someone who is born through vagina birth will receive the vagina microbiome from the mother, right? And compared to someone who's born through cesarean section, that normally will be colonized by skin and environmental microbes. The other factors will be breastfeeding versus formula milk. So the baby that receives breast milk will have a higher concentration of bacteria such as bifidobacteria that will be able to digest the human milk oligos coming from the mother breast milk. Uh, this will be lower in the formula fed baby. So importantly, there are also exposure to the environment. So we do receive microbes from our friends, from our family, and from the environment. So there's this hygiene theory mentioning that if someone is ultra hygiene, in fact they have a lower diversity, right, and which will be less resilient to the changes to the gut system. So we are also receiving microbes from our diet. For example, the consumption of fermented food such as yogurt, such as kimchi. So the food environment will also shape the microbiome in our gut.
It's interesting also how microbiome can potentially affect obesity. As a gastroenterologist, I'm also very interested, and there's currently actually a clinical trial going in Melbourne, inflammatory bowel disease, and with the fecal microbiota transplant, how it affects the Crohn's disease. Can you tell us maybe a little bit? I think our viewers will be interested to hear about microbiome and obesity connection.
Thank you, David. So I think I will start off with obesity. So microbial composition, which is high in Firmicutes over the Bacteroidetes, is associated with increased energy harvesting. So that actually lead to higher calorie absorptions and fat storage that driving the obesity. The dysbiosis of the microbes can also cause a low-grade inflammation, which is basically the hallmark of obesity. Proportion of bacteria that can produce short-chain fatty acids, because short-chain fatty acid can control the satiety through the regulation of hormones such as GLP-1 and also hormone PYY. So there's also the link between the microbes and the host gene. So the microbes will be able to modulate the host genes involving in energy storage and also expenditure that will contribute to the obesity.
Professor Chong, I touched a little bit about the fecal transplant, as it used to be called. Of course, it's called now fecal microbiota transplant. And I remember sitting in one of the American conferences in 2013 on gastroenterology when it was the first time when a group from Netherlands presented a randomized controlled trial of a fecal transplant. And I remember all gastroenterologists looking at each other and going, what are we talking about? I mean, you've got to be joking here. But it has become mainstream. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the fecal microbiota or the fecal transplant, and where do you see this is going?
Right. So, so David, so for the fecal microbiota transplant, essentially is actually transferring the microbes from the stool sample, a healthy stool, into someone who has a condition. So currently, the most recognized treatment of FMT, of fecal microbiota transplant, is actually for Clostridial difficile infection. So the cure rate is about 90%. So it is very, very efficient in actually curing C. diff infection. So traditionally, the FMT is actually performed through the skull, so it's mainly the bottom up. But recently, there is also an improvement whereby there's an oral FMT. So one of the company in US has successfully gotten the FDA approval for the oral fecal microbiota transplant, right? So it is actually a very promising field. But at the moment, again, like I mentioned earlier on, the cases that we are seeing now are mainly for C. diff infection. But despite the fact that people has been using it for IBD, for IBS, for obesity with certain success, but at the moment we still don't really have a lot of evidence into this, and I think more research is required to really understand what is the mechanism, how does this uh, uh, helps in the real evidence in order to support the efficacy of the FMT other than C. difficile infection.
Very interesting. Professor Chong, I wanted to talk about microbiome tests because I think, as you're well aware, and we certainly see this a lot in Australia, is there's been a growing sort of diversity of various microbiome testing companies, and we actually have a collaboration with one of them called Gutlinks. How reliable are these tests? Is it a bit like going on Amazon and buying a supplement when you don't really know what's in it?
Right. So the microbiota testing is actually getting quite popular nowadays. Right. So basically, what it does is actually it give us a snapshot of the microbial composition. So this allows us to understand, the diversity of the microbes that we carry, and also it also helps us to identify major imbalance. For example, what would be the abundance of bacteria that can confer certain functions. How do we compare that with the healthy subjects? So most of the time, the company that offer the microbiota test would have their internal database for comparison. So I think one thing that we need to be aware is what is the type of database that they're using, and how do they interpret the result. I think personally, to me, it is perhaps helpful for wellness, for us to optimize our health. But again, one important thing is that the microbiota test for at this moment is still not used for diagnosis. It's not for disease diagnosis. We cannot replace that with the medical report and the what is currently used clinically. So, but however, another advantage of doing the microbiota test to me would be the ability to do a longitudinal tracking. So you will be able to see what would be the efficiency of, say, changing a diet. How would that affect your microbiome?
Professor Chong, what importance does diet and dietary factors have in shaping the microbiome? Are there any particular dietary suggestions that you would have that people should have to improve their microbiome, to improve their health and longevity?
So basically, food that is high in fiber is good, because again, the fiber is the fuel for the beneficial microbes in our gut. So food high in veg, in legume, in fruits, in whole grain will be useful. I think taking fermented food such as yogurt, kimchi, kombucha, and so on and so forth is also very useful, because it actually introduce the beneficial microbes into the system. Um, we should also be considering taking a prebiotic food, like for example the garlic, onions, banana, and so on and so forth. But because, for example, things like banana will be very high in resistant starch. But I think one of the consideration is that people with IBS may not be able to take certain type of this food, because they are very high in FODMAP, producing gas, sorry, the hydrogen sulfide that actually will cause bloatedness.
Antibiotics. We certainly in Australia take a lot of antibiotics for various conditions. How does that affect the microbiome? And a second question is, if you are taking antibiotics, should you follow that with perhaps some probiotics?
Antibiotics, it is depending on whether it is a broad spectrum or it is a targeted antibiotic therapy. So the problem with the broad spectrum antibiotics is that it actually will cause the loss of diversity, right? So In fact, the C deficit infection that I mentioned just now is actually normally happen after several dose of broad spectrum antibiotics. So that reduce the bacterial richness, diversity, and perhaps compromise the functions of the microbes. So some of the clinical, as far as I understand, some doctors already recommend their patients, for those who actually take antibiotics, to follow up with the probiotics just to rebuild the microbes in the system. So this actually hopefully this is to basically to help to rebuild the microbial composition, and also to then to allow the microbes to rebuild themselves.
Professor Chong, what do you see are the exciting frontiers with microbiome research in the next 10 years? And the second question with that is, where do you see personalized probiotics? Because currently you can go to a supermarket and you can just get probiotics as one, for everyone. And my gut feeling, excuse the pun, is that it's not one fit. There should be personalized probiotics depending on your particular deficiency in your microbiome. What are your thoughts on that?
As more research that is conducted, we get to move beyond correlation. So we know certain causative relationship between microbes and also the health effect, right? So like for example, so there's a study that looked at why would a person with a better gut composition do more exercise. The reason is because when you have a when you have a good gut microbes, the exercise actually trigger a reward system. The good microbes in the system will be able to produce dopamine. So the dopamine will be actually motivate the person to exercise even more.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Right. So if you don't have a good microbes, you don't have the reward system. So there's less motivation or less reward for someone to actually exercise. So I think is this understanding that actually help us to really make full use of the microbes in order to modulate and to optimize our health. So the other thing would be, for example, there have been a lot of talks about Akkermansia muciniphilia. Okay, in fact, it has been touted as one of the next generation probiotics. But one of the recent studies shows that in a fiber-rich condition, Akkermansia muciniphilia is really good because it actually helps in producing short-chain fatty acid. It actually helps to build the mucosa. But in the condition where fiber is low, meaning that the intake of fiber is low, it actually helps with the pathogen colonization. The reason is because they start to chew on the mucosa layer. It actually causes a thinning of the mucosa. So it could be good in one condition, but it will be bad in a certain scenario. It's depending on, it is actually quite complex. It actually linked with the diet, with the health system, or with the health condition, and with the metabolism at that moment. So everyone is different, and every condition is different. So now we are moving towards understanding all these nuances in order for us to really move towards personalization, like your second question. So as for personalization, I think at this moment we are getting there, but we are still very far. So there are different level of personalizations. Okay, David, you mentioned about going to the supermarket and look at different brand of probiotics. How do we choose? I think one of the main thing is that, do you know what you have, right? So, but again, when I was talking to one of one of the colleague, and then the question that he asked would be, then how do I know, right? So even if I want to test myself, how should I test myself, right? So I think that these are the questions that leads to how do we then connect all the different systems together in order to allow the ourselves to make informed judgment of what is useful for me. Yeah, how do I build on the understanding of myself in order to choose the right probiotics and also the right diet. Even though I personally feel that it will still takes maybe another 5 to 10 years for us to really understand. Like for example, one of the company which I understand, they actually recommending the type of food that will reduce the to reduce the blood sugar, for example. The idea is that if you have enough information, you will be able to see what type of microbial composition will be more reactive against, say, for example, rice versus ice cream, right? So you may have a profile that will increase the blood sugar when you take ice cream, but you have another profile that you have increased blood sugar when you take rice. But this require really tremendous amount of data in order to actually get to that kind of granularity. So we are there, we are getting there, but it still really need a bit of time for us to really fully understand all these differences.
Professor Chong, thank you so much for your time. I think this is a really very exciting area. 5-10 years ago, we had no idea about microbiome and the far-reaching impact of it on immunity, on metabolism, on mental health. So I think this is really space to watch, and I'll be very interested to hear what happens with research in the next 5 years. Thank you again.
Thank you, David, for inviting me. Thank you.